Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in to rmpodcastfl. Yes, just like I said on the intro, this is your favorite podcaster, Romina. It's Tuesday, and we got a new guest today. We got Michael Colburn. Hi, Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing just great, Romina.
Happy Tuesday, first and foremost. And I want to thank you for being a part of the show. And without hesitation, I definitely want to pass on the mic to you to tell us how awesome you are. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more of what you do.
Well, my name is Michael Colburn. My background, I'm actually an industrial engineer by my training, and I worked several years in that. And then I went out on my own as a consultant, working mostly with closely held companies, companies anywhere from $10 to $100 million, and really helping them to move from that entrepreneur stage to sustainable growth. And so I went back to school and I got my master's in industrial and systems engineering and management of human resources, kind of combined them. And I got my doctorate in adult education. And when that all happened, I really found that my work with my clients was much more integrated with the human element as well as the more technical element. And then they gave me an opportunity when I was getting my graduate work to teach. And I fell in love with teaching. And so what I started to do, even when I got my doctorate, I went back to my consulting work, but I started teaching the evening time in various colleges. And then one of them offered me an opportunity to be a regular faculty member. And the last 10 years or so of my work career was doing that. Loved it, taught business students, MBA students, and undergraduate students in a number of topics. So during that time, I started writing things for my students, because sometimes I'd read the book and it wasn't quite there. And so I'd write things for my students, and I have a whole bunch of papers that I wrote mostly for my students, although I've written some, for academic and professional journals and trade journals. And that really got me interested in writing. And then I wrote my first book, Own Your Job, 5 Tools for Self-Management and Accountability in the Workplace. And that's kind of my passion right now, to get the good word out there and people how to own their own job and take control of their career.
And I think that's super important, especially we're going to focus on today's interview too, towards the self-management, the principles that you break it down. It's very essential, I would say, especially now more than ever, working from home or working independently with not the boss kind of looking at you all the time.
Right.
It's very important. But before we do jump to that, I do have a question, because you say you focused into helping entrepreneurs how to go from that entrepreneurship or side hustle spirit into sustainable growth. And as much as, with many job losses that we have because of COVID, we also have seen a side of people that are finally launching their dream or their passion, and their entrepreneurship spirit is coming out. Right. But what advice would you give to those people towards not just, working like crazy but actually converting those leads or those contracts or that product they're working on, converting it to an actual profit at this point? What would you suggest somebody brand new in the business?
Well, I've been asked by many people, a lot of times they're my students or colleagues or clients, and who really want to go out for business for themselves. And I think that's great. We want to have an entrepreneur spirit. And one thing I would tell them is to, very often there is a need that they have that they can fulfill. And one thing I said, you need to check out to make sure that that need, which is probably quite valid, is the perceived need that people really know they want it. So I really have them do a lot of informational interviews, talking to people and asking the hard questions about what it takes to be really good at something, and to launch that. Interesting, I was talking with a colleague of mine yesterday who is also an entrepreneur and an academic. And we're talking about the relationship with a client. And I found that to develop a client relationship, because I had long-term relationships with my clients, and I found it's kind of a 3-step approach. The first early meetings is I have a blank sheet of paper with me. And I go in and typically they will have an issue they're dealing with. Maybe it's profitability, maybe it's turnover, maybe it's quality. And very often they will give me an assumed cause of the problem or an assumed solution. And those are the presenting problems. And my experience has been, it's never quite that, you know? It's not that they're not telling me the truth, but they're just telling me what they're feeling. And so instead of saying, I don't think you're right, I would just have, tell me more about this. What are the symptoms? What are the issues that you're dealing with? And after that conversation, it's really to find out beginning to find out the underlying issues that they're going with. For example, you know, they may say, I think we need a better compensation system to retain employees. Well, I said, well, tell me why you think that's important. And so that first interview is, and sometimes it's a series of interviews, is to really to dig deep into the underlying issues that sometimes they haven't thought about. And I think one of the strengths I have, which is important for new entrepreneurs, is really understand yourself, is to do good diagnostics. So then I would come back, and my second step would be what I would call a concept proposal. And a concept proposal is, here's what I heard you say. Here's some issues that are coming up. Here's the approach that I think I suggest you take at this point. And I say concept proposal because something in the second meeting always turns up that wasn't in the first one, you know? And so I don't even put a price on it, but I want to have a good idea of my approach, and is this a good fit for us? So I never try to close the sale very fast. And then based on that, sometimes there's some changes in the proposal, and I'll review it. And I said, well, let me get back with the final proposal. So when we get back to the final proposal, it's pretty much understood they're going to go with it. You know, the first meeting where I'm asking all the questions, I build credibility with my questions, which is much more important than your answers. You know,
I love it. It kind of reminds me of like the sales funnel. I'm working on an online course for sales funnel, which is more like a business development.
Right.
What I hear is early meeting, you know, there's an issue, you deeper question it, you try to get to the root of it, not necessarily give your opinion, but try to, you know, okay, well, what do you like? Why did this, you know, what makes you think this issue is going for, and try to have them come up with the solutions. And then you go in and present your perception, because, you know, like, hey, this is what we can do, and then do the close.
Right. I think the power of questions is much more strong and influencing than the power of answers, because then the ability to truly listen, and they have to be true questions, not manipulative questions. They have to be questions that you really want to know the answer. And what I found is that very often the person, by answering the questions, discover things they didn't even know, you know? So it helps, good questions help people think. And I have to give them a chance to think, you know, and to listen intently to what they're thinking and saying. And I think in that first meeting or two, it's really the psychological sale. At that point there, that's when they want to work with you. Even if the proposal doesn't go through, they want to work with you, you know? And I learned that I had an opportunity to talk with Honda Motor Company years ago. And I was invited to a presentation of a number of suppliers. And I made a proposal. They got back with me and said, Michael, and this was in the early days of Honda here in Central Ohio. And they said, Michael, we really like your proposal, but there's a lot of people from the University at Ohio State there. And they said, but we decided to go with another one because we really want to develop a relationship with them, but we want to encourage you to keep making proposals. So I said to them, I said, so does that mean I'm always going to be working under a handicap system? you know, because I don't want to do that. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. Well, sure enough, a few months later, they gave me a call, and I got a contract I was working with them for about 3 years, you know, which is exciting. So don't, even though we don't make, quote, the sale, sometimes we really have made a sale.
Yeah. Right? And I think it's very important, like you mentioned, like sometimes patience is super critical on this type of contracts or an entrepreneurship spirit, because what I've seen people, or especially like nowadays on LinkedIn, for example, like when those cold sales or cold messages, because I understand people have ideas and they want to run a business, but you have to work and you have to be patient and show that you're actually what you're going to be able to offer them, because if you try to say, hey, like I get messages sometimes like, hey, you have a podcast, we're going to promote your podcast, make it #1 podcast in the world, but this is our monthly. So typically my reply is, thank you so much for reaching out. Which episode did you like the most? And why do you think my podcast has the potential to be the #1 in the world?
Great question.
And I don't get messages back when I say that.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
So it's very important that, that exploring stage, the discovery stage is super important. Those questions, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, let's talk a little bit about the 5 principles of self-management. I did find that very interesting. So I want to let you break down those 5 principles first. And then I want to focus for the audience towards how we can do this with in-person and virtual, since we're technically living in a virtual world right now. I don't know when we're going to go back to the real world. I hope everything opens up soon, because I'm a hugger and I miss hugging people.
Yeah, me too.
I'm like, let's talk to everybody. Let's have parties. But let's talk about the 5 principles. I'll let you go over them.
Well, first, let me start with my definition of self-management. Self-management is the ability and the will to work in the best interest of the company, without requiring any external consequences to motivate your behaviors. So it's really based on intrinsic motivation. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think there should be external rewards, but if a person needs external consequences to do what they're supposed to do, then that's not a really good start for self-management. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the simple definition I have. So what I found is that there's 5 fundamental principles that are the foundation of effective self-management. The first one, I work for the customer. I don't work for my boss, actually. I'm accountable to the boss, and that's important, but I work for the customer. It's a value I create for the customer that really makes a difference. And a lot of people in organizations, they say, well, I don't have any contact with the customer. Well, actually, they do. There's different kinds of customers. You have the external customer who receives whatever your organization is giving, but you also have internal customers. And so I have people identify who their internal customers are, and those are the people that we provide services, products, information to help them do their job for the ultimate customer. So I work for the customer is a fundamental principle of self-management. And I think that helps people starting thinking more like an entrepreneur too. Second principle, I manage my own performance. It's not my job. It's not the boss's job to manage my performance. It's my job to manage my performance. Therefore, I have to be accountable, And when I think of accountability, I'm accountable when I'm making clear commitments, when I take the responsibility to give feedback on my performance first, and then third, I own the consequences, good, bad, or indifferent. So to self-manage is I manage my own performance. And you can start seeing when you have those principles, this with the next principle I'm going to share with you, helps change the fundamental relationship between the job holder and the person who reports to. So the third one. Third principle is my boss, and I'm using quotations around that. My boss and I are partners in performance. We have a partnership. Often I'll ask people to talk about their best boss, and they tell stories, and what comes out very often is a collegiality. There's a respect and collegiality. They're working together. And I think about some of my best bosses, that was always the case. The fact that there was an authority piece there was almost secondary to the fact that we have common goals and we're working together for success, always for the organization and its customers. Mm-hmm. Okay. The fourth one, I am loyal to the truth. So, and when I'm loyal to the truth, I don't try to make excuses. I don't try to make spins. I'm loyal to the truth. And if there's going to be bad news, I'm going to be the one that's going to share it. Say, so Romina, I worked on this project and I know I was supposed to get it done by Friday and I didn't get it done. Here's what I'm going to do to correct it, you know. And even if there are valid excuses, it's still a performance problem, right?
Yeah.
You know? And that doesn't mean and so it doesn't mean I have to feel shame, but I'm going to learn from my mistakes. So I'm loyal to the truth. And I set myself by being loyal to the truth is by making clear commitments. If I make clear commitments, then I have to be loyal to it, you know. The fifth principle is I'm a lifelong learner. It's great if an organization provides learning opportunities for people, but don't let that stop you, you know, or be your excuse for not learning. When I was getting my doctorate in adult learning at Ohio State, one of my area of interest was self-directed learning. And all the research showed that about 90% of what people learn is self-directed and also in an informal environment. So it's great to take classes and workshops. Those are all good, but a lot of it is just what you do. So if I need to learn something, I normally look for people who know it that I don't know it, you know, who know more than I do about something, and offer and ask them for help. And of course, I have to do the same thing back and forth. So those are the 5 fundamental principles that drive self-management, and also drove a number of tools I developed to help implement that.
So I want to kind of highlight a little bit, because all those 5 principles, I feel like for people that work sales or somehow commission based, they do have this, like that inner entrepreneurship, even within a business. They do have those 5 principles because they do think of themselves like, I work for the customer, like I'm here to serve. I want to manage my own performance because my commission at the end of the day, for example, bases on my performance. My boss and I are partners. Yes, my boss or the president or whatever, yes, they're doing the investment, but technically I'm getting a percentage profit of all this investment. So I'm not locking down money down, because that's what business is at the end of the day. Right. Loyal to the truth. That I think that's sometimes not easy for people to do, because you pretty much have to call yourself out, even if you mess up, right. Which we as humans sometimes take to make excuses, but I think it's important to be like, hey, you know what? I messed up. Like, this is what I did. I messed up. Help me learn from this. What did I do wrong here?
Right.
That's like a whole thing that people don't do. And then lifelong learner, that's super important, because I feel like student mentality, it's not in every employee, because they feel as, okay, well, I have my set salary. I'm fine. I don't need to learn. I don't need to do nothing else. Mm-hmm. And that's when you become easily replaced too, for somebody that might know more but get paid less, right. Because the marketplace out there.
Right.
How can we practice, or how can we help, like as executive leaders or the frontline managers, how can they help how can they help employees learn these principles or guide through these principles virtually? Because in person it's very different, but virtually, right. It adds more complication to the equation. How can frontline leaders do that?
Well, I've been teaching I have a series of workshops I do that are around my book, mm-hmm. and forced it down to it virtually, which that's a good question on how to do that. One of the issues that I have come up with early on as I've been teaching a lot of these tools is everyone capable of self-managing? And it's kind of implicit in maybe some of the comments you made, right? And my answer to that is, I think the vast majority of people are capable of self-managing, but whether or not they're ready for self-management is maybe a different thing. And I did some research on what jobs, and I found out that the nature of the job has a certain impact on the ability to self-manage. And I did some research and look, because I was doing some workshops early on in my career before I even wrote the book on goal setting and time management. And I found some people came out of those workshops just raring to go and finding so much benefit from it. And other people came out kind of frustrated, you know, and I was trying to figure out, well, why would that happen? And so here's what I did my research for my master thesis. And here's what I learned. There are 3 job characteristics that are critical to that align with self-management. One is task significance. And task significance is really the belief you have that what you do counts, you know, that I'm really creating something of value. And when task significance is high, that's moving you to self-managing. The second characteristic was autonomy. Some jobs have more autonomy than others. And autonomy is really the degree to which a person has control over the method they use to get the job done. You know, often you might be given goals, but the method of how you're going to do it. And a third was feedback. And I'm not talking about personal feedback. I'm talking about the feedback that the job gives you. You know, that the job provides feedback to you. You know, so when I was a young engineer and doing my studies and things like that, I knew by doing them whether or not I was doing it right or wrong. I have a friend who is an artist. Well, he doesn't need someone to give him feedback on whether or not he made a mistake or he did something well. So it's really the natural feedback, much less the personal feedback on somebody else. Those three things, when those are relatively high, they don't have to be right at the top. Then I've found that jobs like that are more open to self-management than others. Then the other one is an individual skill, which is internal growth need. If a person has high internal growth need, and what I mean by that is that they really want their job to be a source of motivation and satisfaction for them. There are some people in their life where, you know, they're working and they're going to school and their job, and they do a good job, but it's not the end all at that point. It's really to get to the next step. But when the job itself is important to a person, so you put all those four factors together, that's the sweet spot for self-management. So the answer to, a roundabout answer to your question is, if those are high, people can make it no matter what methodology we use, whether or not it's person to person or it is in a virtual format. But I'm doing that now. I'm working with some people virtually on how to do that sort of thing. So each tool requires, the first tool, and I won't go into detail, is what we call a performance agreement. So a performance agreement is really almost like an organization scorecard. And matter of fact, I help people to develop it much in the same way I help organizations develop their scorecards. They go out and interview the customers. They ask questions that are critical questions. How do I create value for you? What are your expectations for me? How will I know when I've done a good job? What are the performance measures? And what can I do to improve and grow in the job? And so what happens is they develop a document, and the document is, and then we turn those into goals and performance measures. And so I think lacking that, it's hard to manage in any way, but I think it's particularly important in a virtual format, because now if you're the person I'm reporting to, and I have 5 or 6 key goals that I'm doing and measures, and I'm taking responsibility to feed that information to you, then at that point there, we have an accountability system that's set up so you don't have to figure out whether or not I'm doing my job. Yeah. It's my job to let you know I'm doing my job. Interesting, I taught the course in self-management as an MBA course, and I was teaching one of the tools, and one of the tools is about how to talk with your boss, how to proactively have a meeting with your boss. And it's the job of the job holder to run the meeting, not the boss. So when I teach this, I teach that the boss and the job holder to do it together. I invite the boss to the classroom or the session. And one thing is, and I teach them how to have this meeting, you know, and they have to decide on what the agenda, what the format is and things like that. Well, when I teach this class, very often the boss is in another place, so they brought him in remotely. So I taught them how to do the meeting, not knowing that we were going to get into the situation in terms of remotely, you know. And that's the third tool. One of my early tools is a priority feedback system. And I have to tell you one thing, Roman, the boss loves it. The boss loves it when the person runs the meeting. Here's what I said I was going to do. here is my progress. Here's some things I want to do in the future. And at that point there, if I'm bringing up things, let's say I have shortfalls. Mm-hmm. If the job order brings it up, it changes your job in a very positive way as my boss, because I brought it up, not you. I said, I'm having a hard time, whether it's making that sale or solving that problem. And then the boss can play a coaching role at that point there. And that changes the nature of that relationship. So I think clarity of expectations and making sure that the expectations are understood by all the key relationships really helps virtual as just as much as live at that point there. Because what I'll do is I'll just send the report to you and you'll be seeing it when I'm talking to you about it,
That is so true, though. And you just reminded me something with the shortfalls. I remember last year, my dad unfortunately had a stroke. So it just took a lot for the family, like with doctor's appointments and everything. Right. And I remember for like a month, typically I would be in like the top 5 for the sales agents in the whole department, like 200 people. But I remember that month I was like, 30th and below. And I remember going to my manager. I was like, listen, it's too much going on with my family. I understand. Like, I'm still meeting all the stats. I'm just not where I'm at right now. Can you help me with this? And the manager was super surprised, says, this is surprising for you to even come here, and admitted that you need help because you have a lot in your family going on. So you need guidance towards what can you do to, not let personal life get to this. But I feel like sometimes employees, unfortunately, I feel like they also feel titled towards, I'm titled to, just do my job, meet my metrics or whatever. But it's a very important that lifelong learner step for self-management, because you always want to improve and recognize, own up, going back to loyal to the truth, owning up to whenever you have a short back or whenever you have a fall down. And not a lot of people like to admit it because it's also the ego in it.
Yeah, there is ego. And I think also this tells me the importance of a manager's job or a top leader's job is picking the right people, picking people who have some of the characteristics that will help them for self-management. And the other thing I'll say, when I'm working with an organization, very often I get the top people in the organization excited about my tools and want to do it. And I'll start with them. I said, well, why don't you use them sometime, which is the best thing to do, And then the other one is, don't ever require people to use these tools. Now you can require them to be performance, but make it, they have to ask to use the tools, to be trained on that sort of thing. So give the tools, the opportunity to people who want it more than the people who need it, And what I found is the peer-to-peer communication influences the other people much more than the boss does. Because they see that they're getting things done, they're having relationships with the boss, and I like to see it grow in a more organic way in an organization instead of just putting out that everybody has to use these tools, because some people are not quite ready for these tools. And what I've done in those cases is we might pick out some of the tools that they might be ready for, or guide them along, and so instead of having them develop a whole performance agreement, maybe take one area of their job and let the boss coach them on that part there, because some people are not quite ready to make that big leap. And this is particularly true with maybe some new people in the job because they're still learning the basics. Mm-hmm. So I think there are ways to do this in a way that helps people grow into the job that maybe they weren't ready to do in day one or the first 30 days.
Yeah, you need the fundamentals in order to grow from there, so you are more into the topic and everything.
Absolutely.
Why do you think some companies don't even practice regular development for their employees? Because there are companies, Fortune 500 companies out there, or big companies, that they're just kind of becoming stagnant, and the employees are doing the same thing day in and day out, and that's when they start losing those top talents, or that's when the revenue goes down. Why do you think not every company practices, hiring a consultant or hiring outside source to come and help, even temporary? What is their biggest holdback, would you think?
Well, there's a couple. The one that I might hear, is, well, if I train these people, they just go to work for somebody else. I'm training them for somebody else,
But if you don't train them, they stay in your business.
Right. And so what happens is sometimes they're afraid that they're training them for somebody else, and therefore, why should I do that, you know? And what I tell them is, well, first thing is the people that you have the most opportunity to lose are your best employees. And if you don't give them opportunities, they're going to go anyway, you know?
Yeah.
And then I would say that even if they leave your company, what do you think they're feeling about the company is the fact that you gave them good ones? They might be a customer someday, you know? And I have one example. I was working with a construction company that was growing, and they got to a point where they needed a business development person, someone like yourself. And so the president of the company, who I was working with for a couple of years up to that point, brought in a person that he knew, and he was a really fine person, high quality person. And the president of the company asked me to work with him to develop his performance agreement because he was really creating a new job. And so I was working with him. And one thing I told the president of the company and everybody I'd worked with, particularly key hires, is I have to tell you one thing, if I go through this process with them, they may find out that this is not the place for them. So can you handle that, you know? And then, so I went through this process with this person, and he'd go out and interview his key relationships. He would do everything I was supposed to do. And I would always send him back to his boss because he was creating his job, because I want to get good feedback there, and back and forth, back and forth. And finally, I had this meeting with this fella, and we were almost towards the end of creating the agreement. And he said, his name was Randy. He said, Michael, I love Dan, who is a president, so much. He's such a good person. He pays me well. He's one of the finest people I know. But this is not the job for me. And I know the company isn't big enough for creating another job. And I'm going to have to leave. So he went and told the boss that he's leaving, you know. Dan, who is the boss, president, he was kind of upset with me for a while. But then he called me and they said, Michael, I know you told me this could happen, you know. So, and he's a good person. And he said, you know, I think that's probably the right move. I hate to lose this guy. Well, then about 6 months later, I had lunch with Randy, the fellow who left. And I had lunch with him, and he had another position. He looked 10 years younger. He was working so hard in an area that was not his. It wasn't even that he wasn't performing with Dan, but he was just not where he should be, you know? And so don't worry about, don't worry about that so much. So that's one reason is overcome the fear of losing good people, because you don't own them anyway. And so treat them well now, and it always will come back positive in a ways that you don't know, you know? So that's one of the answers to your questions, right? Reaction?
That story kind of just gave me chills a little bit, because right there, it's my resignation letter for my last job. I have framed
No kidding. Oh, wow. I see it.
And yeah, like all the ideas, everything that I'm doing now that people are actually seeing, like it was not valued, and I was struggling to know, like the sales system I turned to a business development system, but like the boss wasn't seeing it, so I struggled so much. And I actually got a compliment like that about 2 weeks ago, saying like, you just look so much more energized and so much more refreshed.
Right.
And sometimes you have to take yourself out of those environments. It's not easy. And that's why I wrote an article. Like, that's where my anxiety kicked in. I wrote an article about anxiety medical kit, like smell, taste, touch, see, hear. What can you do when anxiety kicks in? Because that's what caused it for me. But that's so true, though, because you have to take yourself out sometimes. You might lose that employee, but that employee might, 10, 15 years down the road might be the consultant that you needed to get the company to the next level. You just never know.
Absolutely. And just doing what I remember, I had a young engineer working for me, and he had an opportunity to have another job in the same company, but it'd be in a different plant. Young fella. And everyone was telling him, oh, Charlie, don't move. I mean, this is a great department, and they were very loyal to me, And then Charlie came to me, and he gave me the greatest compliment, asking my advice, knowing I would not try to sell him to stay with me, And so we talked about, I said, and the job looked like it was a good growth position for him. His biggest concern was how could he get along with his new boss? Because we had a great relationship, and he didn't want to lose that. And so I coached him on how to interview his new boss to find out whether or not he could work with him. And so I coached him doing that. He came back to me. I hadn't thought about this story for years. He came back to me and he said, Michael, I can work with him. So I said, go for it,
Yeah.
So I, quote, lost a good employee, but that's my job. My job is to lose good employees to better opportunities, even though short term it might seem like it's a loss, but his growth was much more important, and it gives me an opportunity to bring another person on and help them grow.
Very true.
And he was ready to go to that next step, and he would have done a great job, but he wouldn't have had the opportunity in my department that he had with this new job. And I think that's part of it. And we see that with our children. We see that with our friends, to help them to do what's best for them.
That is so true. And I like how you mentioned interview the boss, because sometimes we tend to forget that we also have to interview the workplace. Whenever I would conduct interviews, because I've interviewed people before when I was a corporate trainer, or when I would go for a job interview, I always had 3 questions for the hiring manager, which they always find it weird. My number 1 question was, what would be your biggest challenge for the next 12 to 24 months? How do you see my position helping towards reaching that goal? And how would you measure my performance to say that I will be successful in that position?
Great questions.
And if the hiring manager did not give me answers for this, even if they offer me the job, I would turn it down.
Yeah.
Like and people forget to ask questions. Like, you're not there. I understand paying the bills and everything, it's important, but you also have to invest into a career, because you cannot just end up working a job to job to job. You have to look for a career so you don't end up wasting your life into just a job and, not build skills.
That's absolutely right. And I think when I was, after my first job as an industrial engineer, I found out I was really good at industrial engineering. And so I got pretty cocky, I like to say confident, but probably borderline cocky. I said,
extra confidence never hurts.
Yeah. And I would go, and when I decided I was ready to move on to another job, to me, I'm really looking, is this a good fit for me? Is this a good fit for them? And ask them very much questions like you're talking about, And I think those are great for people to do, because you got to find out that you're worth something and you're valuable, and you want to make sure that you have control over your own career.
Yeah.
And that has a lot to do with the book I wrote, but also just kind of the mentoring of younger people that I've had the opportunity to work with, both as a professor as well as a manager. Matter of fact, I got one yesterday from a student I had 7 years ago. And he was just asking me some questions, and so hardly a week goes by where I don't talk to a former student, and it's always, they're asking my advice or anything I can do to help them grow. And to me, that's fun. Teaching doesn't stop at the classroom, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. And fun story before we go to the last 2 questions. Fun story, because I say this, like, I asked the 3 questions, and a friend of mine last year, I told her, I said, hey, ask the 3 questions to the company. If they answer you good, that means that they have, good upward mobility. The hiring manager knows exactly what's going on. Well, the same friend, it was about to get into a relationship before he got committed. And she asked the guy, she said, how would me being your girlfriend, improve both my life and your life long term? And the guy was stunned. But he had a really great answer. So she's like, he passed. And I was like, great. You technically hired him for a great position.
That's funny.
But I love whenever we talk, because this podcast is about based on, take the, learn at least one new thing per episode, even though we covered a lot of great material today, but apply this in your personal life and your career, because they're both intertwined.
Yes.
When my friend told me that, I said, oh my goodness. I said, that was supposed to be for work, but I said, I'm glad I could help in your personal life too.
It's interesting when I've taught a class on this course on my book, and people come in and we'd go through the whole thing about their job, but occasionally I would have someone come in to the class and they were kind of either between jobs or ready to get another job. So that the tools for their current job wasn't quite as have the motivation for it. So what I did was I said, well, just do it for your personal stuff. Yeah. And so I had a personal supplement for them. And so instead of a performance agreement, it's your own personal life agreement with yourself. And basically the methodology was pretty much the same, but the terminology was different, and I encourage people to do it for their life, as well as their job. And it's, so I have a whole section of the book where saying, here's how you translate the words from this chapter into the tool. So the same 5 tools, but just a different take to it.
Nice. So just to kind of summarize for you guys, we did touch on this podcast episode. We did cover the 3 phases to go from entrepreneurship to sustainability growth, and the phases that you follow one by one: that early meeting, that concept proposal, and the final proposal, which is super important, and the importance of patience, the deeper questioning that we touched there. We did cover the 5 principles for self-management, Michael's book also, which we'll go ahead and attach the information on the details. If you guys are feeling lazy, I get it. You're probably driving or working out and listening to us. It's on the show notes, so click there. But to my audience, don't forget, if you want to see our pretty faces, now we're doing video podcasts too. So hop on YouTube or on our website to do so. As well as we talked about the capability versus the readiness towards self-management, which we broke it down to steps. This interview has been amazing. We covered some really important information, and I feel like the audience needs to re-listen to it to make sure they take notes. Like, I have notes all over here while we were talking on top of
well, bless your little heart. Good for you.
I have this on top of this this was already pre-set up. So well, I learned a lot myself too.
Great, that is great. I learned a lot too.
Well, Michael, I know you're probably not just sitting there and not working on a new project. So what is something new and excited that you're working on, something you'd like to share with the audience so they can definitely go ahead and get in touch with you or definitely look out for?
Well, of course, I've written the book. And what I'm doing now is I've developed a whole series of workshops around 5 tools in the book. And what I'm doing is I want to help people to use these. So I'm offering these now with a sponsorship of the university I used to play for, or used to teach for, play for, right? Like I was playing tennis.
Play in the classroom.
Right. Well, there's play there. Anyway, so they are sponsoring me, and they're going out to organizations to use these tools. Mm-hmm. I've developed a whole series of workshops that can be done either in person or they can be done virtually. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be important. And then I have a friend of mine who's really good at video and things like that we're going to put together some videos to add to my webpage so people can go on. And sometimes you just need a little bit extra stuff, see some examples. And so that's pretty exciting for me. Also, as you and I talked earlier on, I've got all these things I've written. So I started brainstorming that next book. Actually, after you and I talked.
Yes.
And I've got this mind map of all these items for the next book and to put together the next book. And I think one of it is, the first book I wrote was really for the job holder, the person in the job holder role. The next book is for the leader of the job holder. What do you do to build a culture of self-management and accountability to encourage people to be more self-managing and more entrepreneurial in their job? And so I touch upon that a little bit in my last chapter of my book, mm-hmm. but I'm going to now write a whole book on that. And that would be kind of interesting. So I'm doing that as we're talking, you know, and
Nice.
I've written a bunch of articles, and I'm now just have to put them down in a consistent format. So that's pretty exciting.
Knits them all down together. I would love to read that book too. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, we are down to my final question, which is my favorite question too, I have to say. What is your definition of success?
Good question. Well, first, it's living a life of meaning. And a life of meaning means that I am using my gifts, you know, for the betterment of something beyond myself. And there's a certain satisfaction you can't get any other way. And I think the last part of that is therefore I have to recognize my own gifts, right? And then to use them.
Mm-hmm.
And then also to recognize the gifts in other people. And because in our today's society, with all of the tension that we have, especially in the political environment and the other environment, we really need to do that. So if I can live a life of meaning and use my gifts and recognize gifts, that's as good as I can think I can do, you know?
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you again for being a part of the show. You guys make sure to go ahead and look at the show notes. I'll attach all the information where you guys can absolutely connect with Michael. Tell them Romina sent you and you love this interview, because this interview, I think it's amazing. And yes, you guys like it too. But other than that, anything else that you like to add, Michael, before we do end the episode for the day?
Well, if people are interested, I wrote the book. It's on Amazon. It's called Own Your Job, 5 Tools for Self-Management in the Workplace. So a lot of the goodies are in there. And I have a website, www.michaelcolburn.com. And I have some blogs on there, and I have information about my book, and I'll be adding things to it as we go. So that would be a good way. And you can always contact me at dr.mjcolburn@gmail.com. And I'd be glad to talk to you.
And trust me, guys, when I say he will get back to you really quick. He's on top of his work with his emails all the time.
Thank you.
I noticed that, which I love it. If we have a question or while, like, to set this whole up, he would get back to you right away. So definitely go ahead and contact, and I'll attach the Amazon link. Go ahead and maybe you should do a group study for the book, you guys, with your coworkers or with your executive leaders, or just a couple of leaders, executive leaders together, because it's really important fundamentals to learn.
Cooperative learning is really powerful. And I found that getting 2 or 3 people to do it together is so strong.
Yeah, because everybody kind of perceives it differently. Like how I see it, you see it differently. So once you talk about it, you touch every concept or every perception, and this way you learn more out of it too. That is very true.
Absolutely. I agree.
Awesome.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. This is great.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for listening to our rmpodcastfl. It is Tuesday. If you're listening to this any other day than Tuesday, well, guess what? I hope you have a blessed day, even if it's not Taco Tuesday. But make sure to tune in every week for new awesome episodes and educational episodes just like this one. Michael, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you.